Okay, so let's jump right in. About 5 years ago, a think tank made some seriously bold predictions for this decade. We're now halfway through the 2020s, so you know what that means. It's time for a reality check. How much of that radical future has actually arrived?
And when I say bold, I mean wow. RethinkX wasn't just predicting a few changes here and there. They were forecasting, and this is a direct quote, the fastest, deepest, most consequential transformation of human civilization in history, all happening in this decade. That's the kind of mind-blowing scale we're talking about today. So here's the game plan. First, we're going to look at that original prophecy of disruption. Then we'll dive into a reality check on energy and transport, and after that, food and materials. And finally, we'll wrap it all up and see where we really stand today. At the very heart of their report was this huge idea that 5 foundational sectors of our economy were about to get completely turned on their heads by new tech, and that this would trigger the collapse of what they called the industrial age. And look, their vision was super optimistic. They saw costs for all the basics just plummeting, waste dropping by something like 90%, and the old industrial order giving way to a brand new age of freedom, a world where basic needs could become universal rights. This utopian vision, that's the benchmark we're going to be measuring reality against. All right, let's get into our first reality check, focusing on energy and transport. Now, these are the two areas where you'd think the change would be the most obvious, but as you're about to see, the story, well, it's a little more complicated.
The prediction from RethinkX was basically a quick, clean economic knockout for fossil fuels. But the reality? Oh, it's not a knockout at all. It's more like a long, messy 12-round boxing match with totally different results depending on where you are in the world.
And you know what? In some ways, they were totally right. On pure economics, they absolutely nailed it. Solar and wind are now the cheapest new electricity in history. Period. We've seen a massive surge in rooftop solar, and in places like the US and Europe, the decline of old school fuels, especially coal, has been dramatic. I mean, look at that US coal collapse. That's huge. But here's the big twist. A prediction of $25 oil? Yeah, about that. Instead, we saw prices spike past $100. And a global coal collapse? Nope. Instead, usage hit an all-time high in 2022. So what gives? Well, the simple answer is geopolitics, and this huge push for energy security just completely threw a wrench in the works. Okay, now let's switch gears to transport. And just listen to this quote. This really captures how ambitious they were. They said 95% of US travel would be in on-demand self-driving EVs. Not just EVs, but almost all travel happening in shared self-driving cars by 2030. Wow.
Okay, so on the electric vehicle part, they were dead on. Just look at this S-curve. It's a classic. We went from a tiny niche market just 5 years ago to about 1/5 of all new cars sold globally. This part of the disruption is happening for real, maybe even faster than many people expected.
But, and this is a big but, the self-driving revolution is super late to the party. The prediction was for widespread robotaxi services to be rolling out by 2021. Here we are, and we've just got a few small fenced-in pilot programs. The bottom line, teaching a car to handle the insane, unpredictable chaos of a real city street, it's just turned out to be way, way harder than anyone thought.
All right, so now we get to food and materials. And if the transport revolution is kind of a hit or miss, these next two, well, this is where the future seems to be taking its sweet time.
This might have been their single most shocking prediction, what they called the collapse of the cow. The idea was that new tech, like precision fermentation, would make animal proteins obsolete, and that the entire US cattle industry would basically go bankrupt by 2030. So just to let that sink in, they predicted that in just a few years from now, half of all the cows in the United States would just be gone. A total game changer. And the reality, well, we've seen a drop of maybe 1%, and that's mostly just due to normal stuff like droughts, not some high-tech takeover. So yeah, the gap between the prophecy and the reality here is, well, it's a canyon. So what happened? This table pretty much sums it up. The cattle industry, it's still making money. That big boom in alt protein sales, it's kind of fizzled out. And the big one, the tech just isn't cheap enough yet to compete at scale. It turns out a food revolution is about way more than just cool science. And what about materials? The story here is less big bang revolution and more slow and steady progress. So, yeah, 3D printing is doing amazing things for specialized parts in planes and medicine, but our world is still mostly built with good old steel and concrete. And here's the real kicker. The green transition has actually created a new mining boom for stuff like lithium, kind of the opposite of ending scarcity, right?
So let's pull all this together and ask the biggest question of them all. Has that old industrial order actually collapsed? Are we living in the new age they predicted? Here's a quick scorecard. Energy? The direction's right, but the timing was way too optimistic. Transport? A split decision. EVs are a huge win. Self-driving is not. Food? Way overstated. And materials? Slow, quiet progress. And then there's information. The one sector where, thanks to AI, the disruption is happening even faster than they thought.
Okay, so here's the big takeaway. The old industrial order has not collapsed. But let's be real, it hasn't survived unscathed either. We're smack in the middle of a messy, turbulent, and honestly, kind of chaotic transition. It's exactly what RethinkX themselves called being between two ages.
And this is maybe the single most important idea in their whole report. They said, look, technology by itself is never the answer. For society to really get the benefits, our organizing systems, our laws, our institutions, our social rules, they have to change too. If they don't, the tech just gets stuck. And that leaves us right here with this one massive question. The technology for radical change is arriving. Some of it's here, some is on the way. But the tech itself doesn't decide our future. The real question is for us. Are we going to adapt our systems to build a breakthrough? Or are we going to let the friction between old and new lead to a breakdown? That's the real story of this decade. And that choice, well, it's still ours to make.